After 10 years of marriage, I overheard my wife telling her mother, "He's just a walking wallet. Once we sell the house, I'm getting rid of him." I pretended I hadn't heard. A week later, she was on her knees sobbing when she realized what I'd done. It wasn't supposed to end like this. 10 years of marriage unraveling because of a single conversation I was never meant to hear. But looking back, maybe that conversation wasn't the beginning of the end. Maybe it was just the moment I finally admitted what I'd been ignoring for years. I remember that Tuesday clearly, April 23rd. The quarterly investor meeting wrapped up early, a rare occurrence that put me on the road home by 3:15 instead of my usual 7. I texted Victoria that I'd be home soon, watched the message deliver, but received no response. Not unusual. My wife had become increasingly detached over the years, her attention reserved for her Pilates classes, shopping excursions, and lately, her personal trainer, Greg. Our house stood impressive against the clear spring sky as I pulled into the driveway. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, custom Italian marble in the foyer, all purchased with the proceeds from my real estate development company that had finally taken off 6 years into our marriage. Victoria had quit her marketing job shortly after, claiming workplace stress was affecting her health. I didn't question it. If my success could provide her comfort, wasn't that what marriage was about? I used my key quietly, habit from years of late returns, and was about to call out when I heard voices from the kitchen, Victoria and her mother Eleanor, deep in conversation. I paused, not intentionally eavesdropping, just catching my bearings. After a long day, Victoria was discussing real estate prices, mentioning we could list our house for at least $1.8 million, even after paying off the mortgage that would leave over $1 million in equity. Eleanor questioned if I would agree to sell the dream house I bought for her daughter. That's when Victoria's laugh cut through me. Sharp, dismissive, unfamiliar. Not the warm sound I fell in love with a decade ago. Then came the words that froze my blood. She called me a walking wallet with legs and said after 10 years of marriage to that boring man, she deserved this payoff. Eleanor asked about their plans after selling the house. Victoria's response was that she would get rid of me, obviously, because Greg was waiting for her to finalize everything. He was already looking at properties in San Diego for them. Greg, her personal trainer, $200 per session, 3 times a week for the past 8 months. The text messages at odd hours about scheduling changes. The weekend wellness retreats that left her glowing but somehow more distant. All the pieces suddenly clicked into a picture I'd been subconsciously avoiding. Eleanor asked if Victoria had covered her tracks. My wife's response was that I didn't suspect a thing, that I was so trusting it's almost sad. She added that she could probably tell me she was selling the house to save orphaned puppies, and I'd sign the papers without reading them. Their laughter filled the kitchen, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, at least not yet. More like a cold clarity washing over me, revealing the truth of my marriage like a receding tide exposing rocks that were always there, just beneath the surface. 10 years flashed before me, vacations planned around, her preferences, expensive gifts that earned perfunctory thanks, intimacy that had dwindled, then vanished entirely, always with a plausible excuse. The signs had been there, accumulating like dust in corners I refused to examine. I thought about our wedding day at the Four Seasons, her father making that uncomfortable toast about how she'd finally caught a good one. The way she'd gradually replaced all my old furniture with designer pieces that were more appropriate for a CEO. The constant pressure to upgrade, cars, vacations, country club memberships, while her own career aspirations mysteriously vanished. The reluctance to start a family because it would interfere with our lifestyle, even though we'd agreed on children before marriage. I retreated silently, then re-entered the house with deliberate noise, calling out cheerfully that I was home early, as if my world hadn't just collapsed. By the time I reached the kitchen, Victoria had transformed. Her face registered pleasant surprise, her body language open and welcoming. Eleanor nodded politely, her contempt expertly concealed behind years of social practice. Victoria approached, to kiss my cheek, her perfume, Chanel No. 5, a gift from our 5th anniversary, wafting around me. I wondered if she wore the same perfume for Greg. When asked about my meeting, I replied it had been productive and we'd closed the Miller account. Victoria feigned excitement while pouring me a glass of the Cabernet I favored, a $200 bottle I'd brought back from Napa during a business trip, a trip she'd declined to join because wine country is so boring after the first 2 vineyards. That night, as Victoria slept beside me, breathing softly in designer silk pajamas, I stared at the ceiling calculating not just numbers, but time and strategy. By morning, I had a plan. Not a perfect one, perhaps, but a necessary one. I maintained normalcy for the next 2 days. Went to work, came home at my usual time, ate dinner with Victoria, discussed bland topics like neighborhood gossip and upcoming social obligations. I noticed how she checked her phone constantly, always angling the screen away from me. How she'd suddenly developed an interest in San Diego real estate for investment purposes. Small tells I'd been blind to before. On Thursday, I told her I had a business dinner and wouldn't be home until late. Instead, I met with David, my attorney and oldest friend from college. We'd started our respective careers together, sharing an apartment and instant ramen while I built my company and he established his practice. Unlike my other success friends, who Victoria insisted we socialize with, David had never been invited to our home. Victoria found him depressingly practical and unstylish, complaints that now made perfect sense. David was visibly shocked when I told him about Victoria's walking wallet comment and her plans to get rid of me. At first, he thought I was joking. We'd always been the couple others aspired to be, at least from the outside. When he realized I was serious, his legal mind kicked into gear. We spent 3 hours going through all our assets. The house purchased primarily with money from my business, but in both our names, investment accounts, the vacation property in Tahoe that we visited once a year for appearances, and the art collection Victoria had insisted would appreciate significantly, but mostly gathered dust. Our prenup had standard provisions, including an infidelity clause. If either party cheated, they would forfeit any claim to the other's business assets and spousal support. I didn't have proof of Victoria's affair yet, but I intended to get it. The next day, I hired a private investigator, not to follow Victoria, but Greg. I remembered something my grandfather used to say: if you want to catch a thief, don't watch the house, watch the stolen goods. Within 2 days, I had photographs of Greg entering our house when I was supposedly at work, staying for exactly 90 minutes, and leaving with his hair wet. The timestamps matched Victoria's regular self-care afternoons. There were also receipts from weekend stays at the Fairmont, room service for 2, all charged to the secondary credit card I'd given Victoria for emergencies. Apparently, Greg's sexual needs qualified as emergencies in her book. The investigator also uncovered something unexpected. Greg wasn't just Victoria's trainer and lover, he was also deeply in debt. 3 maxed-out credit cards, a Mercedes lease he could barely afford, and a gambling habit that frequented the Bellagio on monthly trips to Vegas. Trips that, coincidentally, aligned with Victoria's girls' weekends, with friends I'd never met. The picture became clearer. Victoria wasn't just leaving me, she was planning to finance Greg's lifestyle with my money. On Monday morning, I contacted Julia, a realtor I'd helped with commercial properties. We'd dated briefly before Victoria, remained friends after an amicable split, and had maintained a professional relationship through the years. Victoria had never met her. My work friends weren't part of our social circle. Julia agreed to pretend she didn't know me when Victoria contacted her about listing our house. The most crucial piece came together on Tuesday. Last year, during what Victoria called my boring estate planning phase, I'd asked her to sign a comprehensive power of attorney. She'd been annoyed about having to go to the notary but signed without reading, her eyes glazing over at the first mention of contingencies and fiduciary responsibilities. It was a standard document for protecting our assets in case one of us became incapacitated, but it included broad powers over property transactions that Victoria clearly hadn't bothered to understand. With that document, I visited our bank and transferred ownership of our home from our joint names to my corporate holding company. The transaction was completed by Wednesday afternoon. The house that Victoria was planning to sell no longer belonged to her or to us. It belonged to my business. It wasn't the most elegant solution, and David warned it might face legal challenges, but it would buy us time and leverage. Victoria brought up selling the house that Friday over dinner. Grilled salmon she knew I liked, paired with asparagus she knew I tolerated only to please her. She suggested that the place was too big for just the 2 of us, and the market was good right now. When I asked what she had in mind, her eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. She'd already contacted a realtor who could come by tomorrow to discuss listing the property. I agreed, saying I trusted her judgment. The flash of triumph in her eyes was almost worth the past 10 days of pretending. Julia arrived the next day, professional and polished, showing no sign that she knew me. She walked through our house, making appreciative noises about the crown molding and the updated kitchen that Victoria had insisted on renovating last year. HEOI, a $150,000 project because no one in the Lakewood community has standard appliances. I remembered how Victoria had argued for weeks about that renovation, claiming it would significantly increase our resale value. Now I understood why resale value had suddenly become so important to her. Julia confirmed it was a very desirable property and suggested we could list at $1, $9 million, possibly more. Victoria couldn't hide her excitement, especially when Julia mentioned we could have offers within a week. Victoria squeezed my hand in a gesture that once would have seemed affectionate, but now felt like the grip of a predator. I simply nodded and said we should do it, watching as Victoria immediately began making mental calculations about her new life with Greg. The following week was surreal. Victoria became unusually attentive, making my favorite meals, initiating sex for the first time in months, asking about my day with what seemed like genuine interest, all while texting Greg when she thought I wasn't looking. I noticed how she'd angled her Apple Watch away from me at breakfast, the screen lighting up with notifications she quickly dismissed. I saw the lingering glances at real estate websites. The Pinterest board titled New Beginnings, filled with San Diego condos and beachfront properties. Once, I caught her on the phone with a bank, discussing the process for wire transfers of substantial amounts. She claimed it was research for a friend. Another time, she spent hours organizing financial documents I'd never seen before, quickly putting them away when I entered the room. The level of calculation was both impressive and disturbing. Had she always been this way, and I'd just been too blind to see it? Julia called on Thursday to say we had multiple offers, including one above asking price with minimal contingencies. Victoria was ecstatic and suggested we celebrate with champagne, toasting to new beginnings. The irony wasn't lost on me as I clinked glasses with the woman who was planning to drain our accounts and disappear as soon as the house sale closed. The closing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Victoria had insisted we both take the day off work to sign the paperwork. The night before, she spent an hour on the phone with her mother, speaking in hushed tones behind the closed bathroom door. I heard fragments. Already transferred. Separate account. Lawyer said. Each word confirming what I already knew. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years, carefully laying the groundwork for her exit while I worked 60-hour weeks building the business that funded her lifestyle. Tuesday morning dawned clear and bright. Victoria dressed carefully in a cream-colored suit she'd bought the previous week for luck, though I knew it was really for the photo op she imagined with her new fortune. She seemed almost giddy, like a child on Christmas morning, as she applied her makeup with extra care and selected her most expensive jewelry. I wondered if she felt any remorse at all, any flicker of guilt about betraying 10 years of marriage, or if the excitement of her payday had completely overshadowed any lingering attachment to me. At 10 a.m. the doorbell rang. Victoria practically floated to answer it, but instead of the title company representative, it was David standing there, leather portfolio in hand. Her smile faltered when she saw him, confusion evident when he introduced himself as my attorney. I suggested we sit down in the living room as we had some things to discuss before the closing. David removed several documents from his portfolio, explaining that he wanted to make sure everyone understood the current ownership status of the property. When Victoria read the document stating the house belonged to MJS Holdings, my company, the color drained from her face. She insisted it wasn't possible as the house was in both our names. David produced the power of attorney with her signature, explaining she had authorized me to act on her behalf in financial matters last year, making the transfer completely legal. When Victoria asked about the sale, I quietly informed her there was no sale and that Julia worked for me and was never going to list the house. Her eyes darted between David and me as her carefully constructed plan disintegrated. David then produced more documents. Photographs of Greg entering and leaving our house, phone records showing hundreds of texts and calls between them over the past 6 months, credit card statements from hotels, and receipts for gifts Victoria had claimed were for her sister, but had been delivered to Greg's apartment. There were also printouts of Greg's financial troubles, the gambling debts, the maxed-out credit cards, the looming car repossession. David explained that according to our prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause, this evidence of her affair meant she forfeited any claim to my business assets, spousal support, or division of property acquired during the marriage through my earnings. He also mentioned that we had evidence of her planning to transfer funds from our joint accounts to accounts solely in her name, which could potentially constitute attempted fraud. Victoria's face crumpled as she tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, and Greg was just her trainer. When I asked if she could also explain calling me a walking wallet with legs and planning to get rid of me after selling the house, she gasped, realizing I had heard every word of that conversation with her mother. She slid from the sofa to her knees, mascara streaking down her cheeks, pleading that we couldn't throw away 10 years of marriage over a mistake, claiming she had been confused. I looked at the woman I'd once built my life around, remembering our third date when she'd been so passionate about her marketing career, our honeymoon in Bali when she'd laughed carefree in a sudden rainstorm. I wondered when that woman had disappeared, or if she'd ever really existed. Had the Victoria I fell in love with been just as calculated, just waiting for the right opportunity? I thought about the Christmas 6 years ago when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and Victoria had sat with her through chemotherapy while I was stuck in meetings I couldn't reschedule. I remembered how she'd organized our entire wedding when I was closing the biggest deal of my career. There had been genuine moments of partnership, hadn't there? Or had those also been strategic moves, investments in her long-term plan? David presented the final document, divorce papers, already filled out. The offer was a one-time settlement of $50,000 contingent upon her immediate vacation of the premises and a clean dissolution. Victoria stared at the papers, then asked where she was supposed to go. I suggested perhaps Greg had room, or her mother, which made her stop short, realizing how this failure would look to Eleanor, who had always valued winners, not losers. Victoria remained on her knees, sobbing not for the marriage she'd destroyed, but for the payday she'd lost. When she begged that we could work this out and she'd do anything, I felt nothing but a dull ache where my heart used to be. I simply told her to sign the papers. David escorted the still-crying Victoria upstairs to pack an overnight bag while I walked through the house that had never really been a home. The furniture she'd insisted would impress her friends. The artwork neither of us particularly liked. The kitchen where I'd heard the truth that had set me free. I'd already purchased a new place, a modern loft downtown, close to my office. Half the size of this mausoleum, but entirely mine. I'd moved my important possessions there over the weekend, while Victoria was at the spa, with Greg, according to my PI. Looking around at what remained, I realized how little of it actually mattered to me. The trappings of success had become a prison of expectations, a stage set for Victoria's performance as the perfect executive wife. When David returned downstairs, he mentioned that Victoria had tried to offer him money to sabotage the divorce, and when that didn't work, she tried to seduce him. I wasn't surprised. She'd always believed in using whatever assets she had to get what she wanted. It had worked on me for 10 years after all. As I prepared to leave, I received a text from Eleanor claiming Victoria said I had tricked her. I simply replied, asking her to ask her daughter about Greg and the walking wallet comment, then decide who had tricked whom. No response came, but I hadn't expected one. Eleanor would distance herself from Victoria's failure. That's how she operated. Success was family business. Failure was a personal problem. Taking one last look around the house that had been the center of Victoria's grand scheme, I decided I would call contractors tomorrow to prepare it for sale. A legitimate one this time. Maybe I'd donate part of the proceeds to a financial literacy program. There seemed a certain poetry in that. Driving away, I felt lighter than I had in years. 10 years of marriage had taught me an expensive lesson about trust and value. But as any good businessman knows, sometimes cutting your losses is the best investment you can make. Would Victoria land on her feet? Probably. Women like her always did. But she'd have to find another wallet to walk on. This one had finally grown a spine. Update. 6 months later, I received an email from Greg's new girlfriend, warning me about Victoria. Apparently, she'd moved in with him briefly before targeting a divorced hedge fund manager. Greg had discovered she was siphoning money from his accounts, what little he had, and confronted her. She'd left that night. The email included a screenshot of a text Victoria had sent Greg. At least Michael was generous. You're just pathetic. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. As for me, the company is thriving. The downtown loft feels more like home than that showplace ever did. Last month, I started dating again, a corporate attorney who pays for her own meals and asks questions about my day that don't revolve around what I can buy her. It's refreshing. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if I missed the signs, if there was something I could have done differently. But then I remember Victoria's laugh as she called me a walking wallet, and I know the truth. You can't fix someone who sees you as a means to an end rather than a partner on the journey. The house sold last week for more than Victoria's fictional buyer would have paid. I donated 10% to a women's shelter. Another 10 went to a financial literacy program at the community college. The rest is funding a new development project. Victoria called when she saw the sale notice. I didn't answer. Some chapters are better left closed.